Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Comms Camp. So today we are going to be talking about reputation. Now, there's lots of times that we'll come back to reputation, and lots of times we've touched on it already. So I guess one of the key things being at the end when we talk about measurement. So when we talk about measurement, we'll go into quite a lot there around how you might want to benchmark your reputation. But the two key things that we're going to focus on today are the development of key messages so that you can manage the reputation and really shape the reputation that you want to portray to anyone that you reach out to with your PR and your communications. And then secondly, we're going to touch on media training as well. So within our diagnostic tool, these are the 5 questions we have. Number 1 is whether the brand is known by the core audience. And we're going to skip that one for the moment because we're really going to focus a lot more on that when we come into things like channels and content. So that's going to be covered off quite well later on in the series. As I mentioned, media training, really important, and excited today to have Rona Dougal from STV joining us to tell us what she looks for in a spokesperson. Delivering key messages at every interview, obviously really important. We like to say that media, our spokespeople should be using every media interview as an opportunity to share a message. So we'll talk to you about key messages today, and we'll work on how we approach key message development. Getting reputation and communications onto the board agenda, obviously really important, and then measuring that reputation, which we'll talk about in part 10, which is going to be on measurement. So to get started thinking about key messages. Now, I know from those people on the call today, some people will be quite far progressed on this. So if you work for a really big organization, you might already know your key messages. There's a good chance you do have a message house, which is what's on the screen just now. So you maybe do have a key message house in place. There's maybe been a key message document that you've inherited or that you've created yourself. However, in maybe some of the smaller organizations or where the comms team is just relatively new, you might not have key messages in place. So what I would say is if you're starting from scratch, then use today's content and the worksheets that we'll be sharing as well to create key messages. If you've already got key messages, I think it's always good to revisit them regularly. And as we've said throughout, the things in the world have changed a lot recently. So it may be that your key messages are no longer relevant. So really important to think about your key messages. As an example, if you run a restaurant and you're impacted by coronavirus, you might have this new message about hygiene and safety that potentially actually wasn't really something that people were so interested in and cared about quite so much maybe 18 months ago. So always really worth looking back at messaging and just checking it regularly, about as regularly as you review the strategy. Whenever the strategy changes, the messages are probably going to change as well. So what we use is the message house, and we would say the most messages you would ever want would be 5 messages. If you can distill it down to 3 to 4, all the better. The less messages you have, the easier it is to remember what they are and to consistently deliver them and build that consistent story. And it's also easier, obviously, for your spokespeople as well. And we would include that umbrella statement as one of your messages. So we'll go into those in a moment. So as a starting point to start developing those messages, a really good question to ask is, what are the top 3 to 5 things that you want people to know about your organization? So a good starting point is just thinking about that question and really trying to prioritize and identify. Now, this is a good thing to go out into the organisation and get some feedback on. So I would never think that anybody would just be creating key messages on their own. Really important to get feedback and get input, both up the way, down the way, and to the sides as well. So I would be involving the CEO, I would be involving people on the front line, and also looking at different departments, because people might have different audience groups. If you are potentially in the drinks industry, you have an on-trade and an off-trade audience, and their messaging might be quite different. Now, I have seen quite complex messaging houses where people will have a set of messages per customer and per audience and for different situations. Personally, I find that a bit complicated, and I would always try and distill your messages back to being just the key 3 to 5 things. And I've got some starting questions here as well that you could use with maybe some of your colleagues and stakeholders to try and create that list of messages that everybody agrees and signs off. So first of all, why are you in business? What do you do? What's your organization there for? Thinking back to when we talked about insights and strategy, what pain does your business fix? What's the gain that people get from engaging with you? If you're in the third sector or the public sector, what does your organization deliver that changes the world, makes it a better place? What do you do that nobody else does? So key messages are all very well, but if your key messages become quite bland and industry specific, a good test of that is thinking, if you took your logo away and put somebody else's logo on top, is it still distinctive, and does it have your sort of footprint on it? Is it really clearly and distinctively your brand? If it isn't, then you're probably gone a bit too industry wide and a bit too bland. So I would think about what you do that nobody else does, and that would feed into what your differentiator is as well. But the number one thing that we're going to be talking about today, both at the messaging stage and also when we talk about media training, is if you or the CEO of your organization were on TV tonight and they were going to be talking about your brand, if you ask people to write down one thing from that interview, what would that one thing be? And yes, it can change depending on what they're there to talk about. But if you can step back and create a real long life messaging matrix, then hopefully what you'll find, and we'll see some examples later on, is that you can use the same messages whether you're in a crisis or whether you're launching something new, and really apply that messaging to lots of different scenarios. So again, if you're thinking about ways to engage with the business in order to create these messages, I love a post-it note. Obviously, we're not all getting together in a room at the moment, but there are some really good online tools, such as Miro, M-I-R-O. So Miro is a really good online whiteboard system, and you can have your own post-it notes with their own colours for different people, and really facilitate pretty good brainstorms using Miro. So a good starting point is to ask maybe 5 to 10 people from different backgrounds and with different takes on things to come together and be part of a workshop. And at that point, if you think about the questions we posed earlier, you could use some of those questions as prompts. You might have some of your own as well. And then start to build a list of what people's points are and what they think those key messages could be. You can then start to group the messages together, because obviously there's a good chance that people are going to be coming out with things that maybe are similar. You might also find people come out with opposites. So if they do, I would group those together, and I would challenge the group to try and decide which one's correct, or which one would you like to be correct also. And then once you've got a shorter list, you can give people stickers or numbers, or come up with some kind of system where people can go and score and put ticks, for example, beside their favorite ones, and give them a certain number so that they are limited and they're less than the number of options you have. And that's a really good way to start to shortlist. Now, obviously, this is going to give you the kind of democratic group vote. So I would always make it clear at the beginning that you're just looking for feedback here. You're not necessarily looking to tie down the messages, because what you might find is when you come on to the later reflection stage of deciding what those messages are, you might then think, actually, we've missed a trick here, and core to our organization, there's a thread running through everything we do, and it's not there. So I would make sure, if you are involving lots of people, talk to them about providing some insights and helping you to shape this, but don't necessarily let them think that there is casting vote and that whatever's agreed on the day is the final version. It can be, though, a really good way to get input and also some buy-in as well. So the way that I like to create these, as I said, is a message house. Now, the message house has the big umbrella message that sits at the top. So this is something that really explains whether it's the campaigns that you care about, whether, you know, in the examples that Fiona was talking about last week, whether it's your purpose and what you're there to do, or it could be something slightly more practical, but it's a big key message that you feel that your spokespeople could deliver in any interview, in any situation at all. So it's one big thing. And if you're going into a media interview, you really want that one big thing to always come out, and maybe the other things are supplementary. It could be that you're a family-owned business, and that is the number one thing that drives your business forward, is you have family values. You've been in operation for 150 years and you're in the 4th generation. So then your umbrella message becomes simple. It's, you know, we're a family-owned business. And then you've got your 4 supporting pillars. So then you can start to build other elements of the story out underneath there. And the reason you want key messages is so that when you go into these media interviews, you have something in your pocket that you're ready to use. And as I mentioned earlier, we always tell people that we feel you really need to use any media interview and any engagement, also any marketing exercise, any influencer engagement, anything like that. Everything needs to have a purpose, and you need to achieve an outcome from each of these, or at the very least go into it hoping to achieve a really clear outcome. So Henry Kissinger was really interesting. I think when you look at media training in particular, politicians are interesting case studies to use. And if you want interesting interviews to look at on the internet, people like Tony Blair were really good at delivering key messages, regardless of their politics, delivering consistent key messaging. So Henry Kissinger was really upfront with journalists, and rather than even pretending to answer their questions, he used to open a press conference by saying, "Can I have some questions for my answers?" And what's really important to take away from that is Henry Kissinger knew what he was going to say before he even had any questions. So he was well briefed and well prepared, and he would go out there. I'm not suggesting that we use this phrase or we get our spokespeople to. We can't have CEOs going out to the media saying, "Give me some questions for my answers." It's just really an extreme example. But it just shows that way that he knew what he wanted to say. And he knew that regardless of what the questions that he was going to be asked were, he was going to deliver his key messages, and he knew exactly what those messages were in advance. So I'm going to just touch on some starting points to media training. We offer sort of full day media training courses where we go into a huge amount of depth and do a lot of practical experience. But at this point, I've really got a kind of top 8 tips. And this could apply either to you as a spokesperson, or also if you're briefing the spokesperson. So if the CEO is going on BBC News tonight, these are some good starting points to try and get them prepped so that they're going to be as good as possible and deliver that message that's all important. So the first one is treat every interview as an opportunity. So as I said, don't do a media interview for the sake of it. Don't do it because you've been asked. Do it because there's a reason and there's something that your organization can gain from completing this interview. And we would always recommend, where you can, having a briefing sheet for an interview. So even if the CEO is arranging them directly and, you know, they're really au fait with dealing with the media, a briefing sheet just gives them everything they need in one page. And I would always put at the top of that, the first point would be, what is the opportunity here? So why are we speaking to this audience and what do we want to achieve from it? And I think that feeds into our second point, which journalists might disagree with, but we would say don't just answer the question. I think that's a real trap that spokespeople fall into, is they are subject matter experts, they go onto the radio to answer a question, and then they get bombarded with maybe technical questions about something they're really passionate about. Now, if the interview is going slightly off track from where you were expecting it to be and what was maybe briefed into you, if you continue to answer the questions, then you're going with the flow. If you know what you wanted to say and what your key messages were, you're going to be able to get it back on track, and you're going to be able to own the interview and deliver an opportunity for your organization. And in the role that you have, if you're a spokesperson, that's what you're being paid to do, and that's what your job is. So if you're not treating it as an opportunity and you're just answering questions and maybe providing lots of facts, you're not necessarily achieving anything there. So we tend to call our key messages rocks. And what we think about is, in each interview, we would take 3 rocks and we would throw them. So we've got them in our pocket, and there are 3 things that we want to say, and we throw them one at a time. And if possible, we'll even go back and try and throw the same rock twice. And within that, I would definitely recommend building a call to action into your rocks wherever you can. So that would be point 4. Point 5 is about being authentic. So you want to be authentic to yourself, you want to be authentic to your brand. And I think 2020's taught us what being authentic really is. We've been seeing into people's living rooms. We've been seeing what books are on the bookcase. People's kids have popped up, you know, whether it's on a Zoom call or whether it's live on the BBC News. So I think people are being much more authentic now, and people are showing that side of themselves. But you also need to be authentic to the brand that you work for. So if you work for Greenpeace, you're probably not driving a Range Rover. So make sure that whatever you're doing is authentic. And I think that feeds quite well into point 6, which is about presenting your best work self. So to give you some examples of this, obviously, we always tell spokespeople, you know, don't swear. Think about your posture. Think about how you present yourself. Be friendly if you can, but everybody has their own personality as well. So going back to being authentic, if you're not the cheeriest person in the world, that's okay. You can still be an authentic spokesperson. You just need to present your best self, your best work self, and deal with the media in a positive way. We definitely recommend that you prepare. And as communications people, often a lot of our job isn't to actually be interviewed, but it's to prepare the people for the interview. So I would say think about what you can give your spokespeople so that they feel prepared, but don't over prepare. If somebody spends a day rehearsing their interview into the mirror, they're probably going to become a bit stiff and a bit insincere. So, and they might not even get asked those questions that they wanted anyway. Obviously, using the training we just talked about there, they've got the questions, so it doesn't matter what the answer. They've got the answers, so it doesn't matter what the question is. But I would say do not over prepare either. And then the biggest mistake people can do is going unprepared into an interview and not understanding the format. So there's so much content and information out there these days. If you're going to be going on Sky News, you know, if you know about that today and it's tomorrow, then you should be watching Sky News today, and you should be trying to see the program that you're on. You should be looking at their style. You should be hopefully knowing which journalist it will be so that you can identify what their approach is like. And then you can start to deconstruct interviews as well and work backwards. So you'll start to watch them on TV and you'll start thinking, I know what their key message is there. And you can also think about whether they've delivered the message or whether they have just gone in, answered all the questions and probably not got across whatever they wanted to. So that's really just a starting point for media interviews. The other thing we would recommend is having a spokesperson grid. So you may find, particularly in a bigger organization, that you might have multiple spokespeople. So potentially the CEO could be approved to do all forms of media, and they might particularly want to be talking about business performance, big ticket announcements, and then unfortunately, if there's a crisis, maybe it's always going to be the CEO that goes out and deals with that. You could then have local announcements. So if you have a chain of retail outlets across the country, you've got some key local media there. And maybe you're going to be building relationships between local media and the store managers. If you're doing that, then you could say that the local media can speak to the store managers, but if there's a crisis, then they're going to bring in the CEO, or if they're going to ask about the performance of the business over the past 12 months and the financial results, for example. So you can start to identify who the spokespeople are, what topics they're comfortable with, and then you can also give approval of what channels they can talk to. And in a really big organization, obviously this stops the Bradford store manager from appearing on Sky News without anybody knowing about it. So we're going to go through an example now, and it's a crisis situation. It's a really difficult media interview for everybody involved. But it was a rail crash, a Virgin Trains crash, and Network Rail and Richard Branson both gave a media interview that was packaged into a 3-minute piece on TV News. So what I'd like you to do is watch this interview back and watch the piece and just take a few notes about what you think the key messages from both of the spokespeople are. And then also think about which spokesperson you feel more connected to and that you feel was maybe more authentic.
Daylight revealed the full extent of the West Coast Main Line crash, with an engine flipped over and 9 carriages forced off the track. Such was the impact of the 95-mile-an-hour accident that the train left tree trunks like broken matchsticks on the embankment. Rail accident investigators have turned their attention to why such an incident should happen on a straight piece of track on a line which has seen millions of pounds of investment in recent years. And the focus of the inquiry has emerged quickly.
Having a set of points immediately prior to an accident always makes those points very suspect, and given the information that we have and examining what we've been able to examine so far, that's the focus of attention at the moment.
But if it is a points failure, that would be the responsibility of Network Rail.
Clearly there is a possibility that it has been something which has occurred which Network Rail is responsible for, but at the moment I cannot say that. I hope that's not the case, but I have to live with the reality that it could be something which has gone wrong under our watch.
The boss of Virgin was escorted around the crash site by investigators and confirmed those early assessments on the likely cause. A clearly emotional Sir Richard cut short a family holiday to visit the scene.
I've been in the transportation business for nearly 25 years. We've transported 500 million passengers, and unfortunately have never had to be in this situation before. I mean, we're right out in the sticks, and one can only imagine what it was like for the passengers in the train behind.
Passengers said that rumbling turned to turbulence and then violent shaking as one by one the carriages left the tracks. The accident triggered an operation involving hundreds of emergency workers. Many of the 100 passengers and staff on board had to be airlifted to hospital. Rescue services worked for hours in heavy rain and darkness in this remote lakeland spot. They expressed incredulity that more people had not been seriously injured. The strength and integrity of the tilting train carriages has been identified as the key factor in protecting passengers, many of whom were able simply to walk free.
As patients recover in 3 local hospitals, there is one overriding view among the many emergency workers and investigators here at the site, and that is how astounding it is to look upon this scene of devastation and yet be able to appreciate still how many people survived.
Despite that, there is a sense of urgency in establishing whether or not a point's failure resulted in a high-speed train carrying 100 people being tossed from the tracks. Mike McCarthy, Sky News, Greyrig, Cumbria.
Okay, so obviously a really harrowing situation and terrible for everybody involved. But what was really interesting there was the two spokespeople, and they had very different styles. Now, the Network Rail spokesperson, he used some phrases that we definitely wouldn't recommend. So he said it does look like this may have been something that went wrong on our watch. Now, we would really not recommend, if you've got a crisis like this and there's potentially a lot of accident investigation that's going to have to happen, we wouldn't recommend going on and accepting liability like that, or really alluding and suggesting where the issue might have lied if that's not 100% clear at this stage. So there's some real kind of media training techniques that you can use, where you would talk about the fact that you will be taking part in an investigation, and you can show empathy for those impacted. And you can take the media interview even if you're not really at the stage of knowing all the details. But from our perspective, we feel like the Network Rail spokesperson probably wasn't quite as strong as Richard Branson. And obviously Richard Branson is really well known as being a strong media operator. Now with Richard Branson, something that was really impressive about what he did was he used his key message, which was, we have been in business for 25 years and we have delivered over 500 million passengers safely to their destination. And this is the first time that we've been in this situation. Now, what I love about that message, even in such a terrible situation, is that that is the same message that Richard Branson was using a month earlier when he was launching some superfast trains. So when we spoke about having a key message that sits at the top, that really oversees everything, those messages around, we've safely delivered 500 million passengers over the past 25 years. That's a great message. And you can apply that to absolutely everything and anything. And it's really easy as well for Richard Branson to remember that, because it's nice and simple. 500 million, that's all he needs to remember. So I think that was really good. And then the other thing that was really impressive about that interview was the way that it was reported and packaged. So the Virgin Trains PR team had clearly been briefing in the media on the safety precautions that are taken by the train company. And also, what I took away from that was, if it hadn't been for the safety of these trains, so many more people could have been injured and maybe killed. So I think that was just a really nice example of key messages and how Richard Branson can take a key message that he uses in a really positive situation, and then he delivers exactly the same key message at a time of crisis, and he does it authentically. So now I'm really excited to be speaking to TV journalist Rhona Dougal from STV. So Rhona is going to talk to us about what she looks for in a spokesperson. So hi Rhona, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Rhona Dougal. I am a journalist and presenter of Scotland Tonight on STV.
Thank you so much for joining us, Rhona. I really appreciate it. I guess to get stuck right in, we're talking about reputation this week. Now, what do you think makes a really good spokesperson?
I was thinking about this, and I think it is someone who has enthusiasm for their brand or their company or their organisation, that you leave thinking, oh, this sounds like an incredible company, I want to hear more about it, or I like the way they work. And also someone who is not afraid to answer questions straight. I don't know whether people just listen to politicians now and think that's how they should conduct an interview, i.e. just never answering the question. So I think if people are really kind of concise and straightforward, articulate, really know their brands, and enthusiastic. And I think if a spokesperson is really warm, that goes a long way to just making the whole brand more appealing, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So you've maybe covered some of this already, but what would you say you're looking for as an interviewer? What do you really want from that person?
Well, I think it comes back. I want to hear enthusiasm for what they've got to say. I want people to be articulate, obviously. Don't want people to be defensive or evasive. And I think most of all, I want them to be available, because quite often you would be amazed the amount of time you get press releases sent out from universities or companies saying, oh, we've got this great product idea survey poll, and you say, great, okay, let's do the interview. Oh, sorry, there's no one available. Well, don't bother sending your press release out.
No.
And it's amazing how often that happens, and it's a real bugbear of me and my team, I can tell you.
I bet it is. And is Zoom changing that? Are you finding people are more available or less available? It's probably a bit of both, is it?
I think people are more available,
More.
definitely. And the people can't make excuses and say, oh, I've got childcare problems, or I can't make it into the studio in London or Edinburgh or Glasgow, whatever, because really you're just asking them to not even change out their pajamas, the pajama bottoms.
Yes.
sit in their sitting room for 10 minutes. So in actual fact, for our programme at night, I think it's made it easier to get hold of guests, because people are much more forgiving of the quality. They don't expect it to be broadcast quality. They know we're all kind of up against it and can't have people going into studios or coming into our studio. So people think, yes, Skype, Zoom, that's perfectly acceptable. So in some ways, it's absolutely brilliant.
Great, that's good. So how would you say TV differs to other formats of interview?
Well, I think the most obvious one is the fact that it's a visual medium. So any little idiosyncrasies, yeah, that's the right word, that someone might have is really kind of amplified tenfold. Like I was doing media training with someone, I think it was a couple of years ago, and they blinked quite a lot. And it was only really once we'd played it back, they realised. So little things like that. Yeah, so very visual. So we're looking at what you're wearing, we're looking at your body language as much as what you're saying. You know, you can be really distracted actually. Whereas in radio, all you're listening to is the message and the voice. So you have to think about your body language, and I think a lot of someone's warmth can come across in a TV interview that maybe doesn't in a radio interview. And for my format, live television, well, it can be quite forgiving in that there's no second chances. Whatever comes out of your mouth is what's going to air. So there's not a chance to say, oh, sorry, can I just do that again? No, you can't, because it's just gone out. So it's more immediate. I mean, I think it's fun, and I think a lot of people come on the programme and actually quite enjoy doing live television afterwards, maybe. Perhaps not beforehand.
Yeah, I can
Quite
imagine.
thrilling.
So, Rona, what's the best interview you've ever conducted?
Oh, that is so difficult, because most interviews I enjoy, because I love interviewing people, really nosy. I just think most people have got something interesting to say. I quite like a kind of feisty politician interviewing them. If they're not answering the question, you keep at them, and that can be quite satisfying. I'm a real bookworm, so I love interviewing authors. Last year we had Val McDermott, the crime writer, on, and just as she walked in the door, I just finished the book. I'd been desperately reading it, and I'm a big fan anyway, and it was just brilliant to say, oh, Val, I've just finished your book, and that can be quite thrilling. And we do quite a lot of big names, Dame Judi Dench, Gemma Thompson, Ricky Gervais. It's the interesting people leading interesting lives. But even kind of ordinary people, normal people have got interesting things to say, and yeah, I enjoy them all.
Absolutely. And what about the worst one? No names required, but what don't you enjoy, or do you have a worst?
People that give very, very short answers or very long answers. People. What I did an interview with I won't even say what the cause was, but he was so deluded, and we started doing the interview, and then halfway through we thought, this guy's I don't really know what he's talking about. And it was a bit awkward.
Oh no.
And I've interviewed Donald Trump. I won't say that's the worst interview I've ever done, but well, it was before he was president, and he was up at his golf courses at Dalmeny Estate, and he was in a filthy mood because there'd been a poll out that day about the fact that people that lived in that area didn't mind the wind farm that was being built, or was it? Yeah, it was about to be built just off the golf course, and he was very much against it, said it would spoil his view. So we kind of came in, and the first questions were about this poll, and he was just in a bad mood from the get-go. And at the end he said, "I'm never going to do another interview with you again." I went, "Oh, okay, fair enough." And I wear that as a badge of pride now.
I know, wow, that's a story, isn't it? So maybe just to wrap up, it'd be great to hear how you think PR people can prepare their spokespeople, and how spokespeople can prepare themselves for coming on live TV.
Have thought, hopefully quite deeply, about what it is you want to say, what your message is, why you're coming onto the programme, and if it is something that you're concerned about, you think you're going to be given a hard time about, run through all the worst case scenarios so that you're prepared. I think often people come in and they just think, I'm going to wing it, and that doesn't work. So even if you can have someone to kind of run through a mock interview almost, it kind of concentrates your thoughts and makes you think about the possible pitfalls ahead. So know what you're going to say, and try and be fairly concise, and try and be relaxed, not defensive, and try and be enthusiastic, and relax and enjoy it. Because remember, it's a great opportunity to push your brand or your company. I mean, it's a wonderful PR opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rona. That was fantastic and really good to get your insights. Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. See you soon.
So just moving into the recap and wrapping up for today, in terms of homework, I think a really good starting point for everybody is to either create a set of key messages, or if your organisation already uses key messages, take this chance to review them and to think about them and to try and apply them to lots of different scenarios, situations and channels, and see if you are confident that that message would still work in lots of different places. Secondly, I would look at developing a spokesperson grid and getting input from colleagues around who should be the spokesperson for what topic and for what channel. And the big thing there is using the spokespeople to their best advantage. So if you have a number of people on the management team, you might have some people that are going to be really good on TV, some people who are great at their job, but they're maybe just a bit nervy. And actually, no matter how much coaching you give them, maybe you just don't feel you can turn them into a confident TV spokesperson. And if that's the case, then I would agree in my spokesperson grid that maybe they're just doing print interviews and written comment and things like that. And they'll probably be grateful as well. And then finally, think about your media training, and that can be part of the spokesperson grid. So you could have a tick box at the side saying, have they had a media training refresher in the past 12 months, for example? So media training, there's loads of times that you can use it at different stages. So first of all, really good for all your spokespeople to just have basic media training so that it's been delivered. And I would say right now is a really good time to be doing it when people are at home. It's easier with schedules to be able to deliver Zoom-based training, which we've been doing quite a lot of recently. So it can be quite a good time to go out and train some spokespeople and get real live journalists on Zoom interviewing them. It's great to do refreshers as well. So for people who are regularly in the media, we would suggest giving them a media training refresher at least every 12 months. And you can use that time both to test the positive things that you have coming up for the brand, and then also to test any kind of crisis scenarios that might be coming up. And then finally, I would build media training into any big announcement that you've got. Again, whether it's a good one, whether it's a bad one, if you're going to be going out and engaging with the media, it's really good to get your spokespeople trained on that topic and give them the difficult questions up front. So that's 3 things to think about over the next week. And we've also got some worksheet information as well that you can use to start to build out those key messages and spokespeople grids. Now, next week, we are going to be talking about planning, which is a really exciting topic. So we'll be introducing some tools and techniques to help you to have really to bring to life your strategic plan. So we've got our audience insights, we've created the strategy. How are we going to make sure that strategy doesn't go into a drawer and it becomes something that is delivered? So we'll be talking about planning. And we're still accepting new people onto the Comms Camp programme, and we have been saving the recordings as well. So if you've got colleagues or friends or contacts that you think might enjoy some of the content and might learn from this, then please do bring them along as well. And please do engage with us on social media. So we've got hashtag CommsCamp, we've got our Facebook group, and we're across lots of other channels as well. So really look forward to seeing you all next Thursday. If you have any feedback in the meantime, please do send it over to events@mucklemedia.co.uk, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.